by way of introduction, my name is Kelvin Dalrymple, and I am both AfriCatalyst coordinator of the ACRI, the African Credit Ratings Initiative, as well as a UNDP Concilium advisor. A bit before that, I also run a credit ratings advisory firm. And prior to that, I spent some years at Moody's Investors Service in London as a rating analyst for a number of sub-Saharan African countries, Cameroon, Ethiopia, Eswatini, Namibia, Tanzania, Ghana, and quite a number of others I had a watching brief over. But prior to that, also, I was in Washington, D.C. at the IMF and the World Bank on the board of directors there, where I had a global view of the world of development and finance. And the earlier part of my career, I was chief economist at the Caribbean Development Bank. And probably most importantly for this exercise, I sat in your seat more or less as a senior official from the Central Bank of Barbados, as well as the Ministry of Finance. So I keenly understand this issue, not only from a credit rating perspective, but also from an issuer. So today I want to take you through what some will consider the softer side of the credit ratings aspects. I know you've been through quite a bit about the methodology, and I just saw some of your exercises, which were very good in terms of understanding and applying a lot of the credit rating methodologies and issues. But today I want to talk a bit more about the process, where I'm going to talk about the crafting of the national narrative, anticipating agency questions, coordination mechanisms, and then I'll put it all together and leave you with some things going forward that you can apply. So essentially, what we have here is a number of session objectives. And what this is all about is strategic communication. And in strategic communication, we're looking to understand why the narrative matters in credit ratings. We learn to anticipate these questions, as I mentioned before, engage the credit rating agencies off cycle, and I'll come to that in greater detail, and explore some effective coordination mechanisms for successful engagement, some of which were used by some countries that I'm familiar with. So first impressions really do count. We talk about it in relationships all the time, and it matters equally in credit rating discussions. What the credit rating agencies assess, apart from the obvious methodological kind of issues in relation to data and the different pillars of the methodology, they're also assessing credibility, transparency, and consistency. And those three things we'll come back to over and over again: credibility, transparency, and consistency. And what we note that over time, strong engagement with credit rating agencies can reinforce positive fundamentals. And the obverse is quite true. If you have weak engagement, they could tend to amplify risk or create some suspicions as to whether the foundations of what you're trying to tell the agencies actually hold. When we craft the narrative, and I said it's crafting a national narrative, not only a very selective narrative, but it's a narrative for the country. What is the DNA of the country that we're looking at? The core message ought to be clear, consistent, and again, that word credible. People must believe what you're saying. You must believe what you're saying to the agencies. It's not surprising that this will be anchored on what you see there on the screen: macro, fiscal, institutional strength, because many of those things are embedded in the methodology. So they're going to be part of your message. But also beyond that, conveying issues around the quality of your investment, projections about your investment, what is your development strategy, how far into the future you're going, medium term or long term, will give you a sense and give them a sense as to where you are on your trajectory for your ratings. Another thing which often is missed, which I emphasize, is clarifying any country-specific constraints. Because the narrative is not only about all the good things, the narrative also includes things that are evolving and things that have not yet been solved. And therefore, we need to talk about them and not kind of brush them aside and hide them away. That's all part of the narrative. What's going well and what's not going so well, but what you're going to ultimately do about the things that are not doing so good at the moment. Avoid these three things. Overpromising is a very bad thing in the context of a rating discussion, because when you overpromise, invariably you underperform, and you don't want to do that in context of dealing with a credit rating agency. The next thing is inconsistency in your messaging across different groups of people, ministries, and different personnel, because that creates a lack of thorough understanding, or either the challenges with incomplete information. That's not good. You want a consistent message across the entire national sphere. And that coheres with speaking with multiple voices. You really don't want that. You don't want one official saying one thing and the other one contradicting it. That's fatal, in my view. So when we look to anticipate the questions, a lot of it you would have touched, and I'm just going to repeat some of it. Looking at the data, you're looking at forward-looking indicators. The past information is very good, at a good basis, but a rating usually lasts for 12, 18, 24 months at the outer limit. And what you're ultimately looking to do is to create an impression, a snapshot of what's happening over the next year and a half to 2 years. So your macroeconomic assumptions have to be sound, and your data, your projections, debt dynamics, critically important, because ratings are all about repaying your debt on time and in full. So the capacity to repay your debt flows in and bleeds into your fiscal operations. What's your revenue like to, what's your expenditure control like? All of these things are going to be important, and you have to talk about them not only in the present, but also in the future. The quality of institutions and governance, they can be measured by the World Governance Indicators. They can be measured by Transparency International in their perception index. But more importantly, what's happening on the ground, how your institutions are functioning, what the quality of your governance is more important in the narrative than the numbers that are produced externally. So this has to be addressed. Externally, what's your current account deficit like? What are your levels of reserves? Are they above 3 months of import cover, preferably above 3 months or much more, because 3 months is seen as a global minimum? What's the political environment like? Is it stable, subject to many coups, turnover in leadership? All of that is going to be critically important, because that speaks to policy. And if you have a stable policy environment, invariably everything else tends to flow. And then when we look at this, this is something that is your secret superpower. I call it your secret superpower. Do not wait for the agencies to come to you all the time. You can approach them, and they're welcome you approaching them. So they come to you every year or so. If there's a crisis, they come to you more often. But there's nothing wrong with, if you're visiting their offices in London or New York or Dubai or wherever, to call them up or drop them an email and say, we're coming to your part of the world. Can we come by, have a meeting, short PowerPoint presentation, drop off a bulletin, quarterly report, annual report, whatever. They welcome this. And this is a very important tool in your toolbox. I think it is fair to say that when rating analysts come to your country, they're usually the lead analyst and a junior or colleague. But if you go to the headquarters or office of the credit rating agencies, invariably you're going to meet management. And meeting management, you get to tell your story directly to them. And not only do you get to tell your story directly to them, but they're also part of the all-important rating committee. So that's a very important tool that you should use. Go see them, engage with the management, and I think that things will go a lot better instead of waiting for them to come to you. Another thing I always say in my advice to sovereigns, view credit rating agencies as professional counterparts rather than adversaries. I know sometimes they don't tell you things that you want to hear, but treat them as professional counterparts rather than adversaries. And I think that would go a long way in building the relationship. In terms of coordinating mechanisms, there are a number of ways that this can be interpreted, but I've interpreted it administratively. And I think many countries that do well, or even those that don't do well, tend to designate a lead agency. Some Ministry of Finance, some the Central Bank, some the Ministry of Development. It doesn't really matter, just have a lead agency and a point person that credit rating agencies can identify with and coordinate with. A technical working group, very helpful. I know at the end of this particular exercise here there in Mombasa, you're going to have a subset of you in the room meeting to work out something similar for Kenya. And this is usually very, very welcome. And a larger number of people get to sit at the table and contribute. Then investor relations functions. This is an ongoing communication channel because meeting with investors, informing them about the rating, any challenges that they may have, very helpful. If needed, some countries are very professional already, so they don't need this, but dry runs, mock Q&A sessions, kind of anticipating what the rating agencies will come up with and kind of bouncing things off each other so that when you actually meet them, it goes very smoothly. And lastly, what I just mentioned to you, very clear protocols. You must know who's speaking on which issues, and so there's no dissonance, so everything goes smoothly. I think this is probably one of the clearest things that you must do when you're speaking with the agencies. Again, kind of wrapping up some of the common pitfalls, mixed messages, incomplete data, very, very one of the ones that are highlighted all the time. You send them data, then they have to call you back to find out why is this one missing, to explain things and all of that. Try to provide as complete data as possible. And if there needs to be a discussion over it, please do engage them. But try to get the data complete the first time around. I put in the third one there as body language because we're talking about strategic communication. A defensive posture when challenged tends to connote that you may be uncomfortable or hiding something, and you don't want to convey that. You want to be calm, you want to be open to criticism and convey what you want to convey very confidently. Overemphasis on politics versus fundamentals, again, another very important thing. If the fundamentals are saying something very strong, try not to gloss over it by saying, well, the political situation takes precedence here and we want to view it in that particular light of that particular lens. That tends to not be the best strategy. Just stick to the fundamentals, be very confident about what you're saying and let the conversation flow. Best practices. I know there are a number of case studies that are coming, particularly in Africa and elsewhere, but I want to bring one to your attention from a country in my region, the Caribbean, and that's Jamaica. Now Jamaica is relatively small by African standards. It's a small country, population under 3 million, growth is relatively modest, about 2%. Inflation about 5%. It's a country that has engaged with the IMF for a very long time. They have had 18 IMF programs since they've been an independent country back in 1962. The size of the economy is around $43 billion US, with a per capita income of about $7,000 US. Reliant on tourism, bauxite, like manufacturing and agriculture. Why this country is important is that it has just gone into double B status, which is like Cote d'Ivoire or countries like that in Africa. And it has a lot of lessons to share because it has done fiscal consolidation very well. It has done institutional reform very well. And it is on the cusp of moving towards and marching up towards investment grade, which is very laudable. It has run very healthy primary surpluses and has done a tremendous amount of, as I said, fiscal reform, but also some monetary reform as well. Of particular note is the EPOC, which I have mentioned here, and that is the Economic Program Oversight Committee, which was largely established to review the IMF programs as they were implemented, quarterly reviews, press conferences to the public, informing the public as to what was going on. And they have morphed this into a committee that also deals with credit ratings. And that's also worked very well. They've blended the Economic Program Committee into something that can also look at ratings. And the synergies have been fantastic for them. I mean, the agencies love it. And therefore, this might be a very good example for Kenya to follow. I put it as an example there. They've also had fiscal rules. And this is very important for discipline. And I think that many countries shy away from fiscal rules, but you can have fiscal rules and you can have derogations from the rules in case of force majeure. If there's something like a crisis, you can derogate. But I think it is very important to have fiscal rules from a disciplinary perspective. So the key takeaways, as I wrap up, the narrative must be credible and coordinated. So everyone must weigh in, must be coherent, very important. The anticipation of the questions, I think once you follow the methodologies and you look to see what kinds of things they're looking for, they will send you a questionnaire at least 2 weeks before the mission. I'm sure you will see that. But there could be a situation where you have ongoing dialogue with them so you know the kinds of things that they're looking for. Again, your superpower, contact the credit rating agencies proactively wherever possible. And this is particularly helpful when you have a crisis, to let them know what's your response, how you're going to deal with matters. Don't let anything slip through the cracks. Make sure that they're fully informed, because if they're not informed, they will make a judgment and it's probably not going to be positive. And institutionalize any engagement mechanisms that you have for sustainability. So as you deliberate towards the end of the week on your mechanism for coordination, think about a mechanism that is sustainable and that will last you through time and will serve you well. Thank you very much. I look forward to your comments, questions, and a lively discussion. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Kevin, for your time and for presenting. Do we have any immediate questions for Kevin before we release them? Thoughts, comments? Yes. Right here.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentation. My name is Lotan from the National Treasury. There is a slide you are talking about things to avoid on the national narrative. I wanted you to expound on the point you talked about, the speaking with multiple voices.
Okay, thank you very much. When I say speaking with multiple voices, I have been in meetings where an official is speaking and he presents, or he or she presents, and gives the perspective of the country. And then another official speaks after and says something which is different. What is slightly or quite different. And then you can see the expressions on the officials' faces that which one of those two things are correct? Or are they both correct, but they usually are not both correct, but which one is correct? That sort of thing I'm talking about. You have to be very careful that, before you go into a meeting like that, you understand who's speaking or what it's to, and that the narrative is sewn up. If not, it could create some confusion in the minds of the credit rating agencies, and they may look upon it dimly.
Great. Do you have another question? Yes, son.
All your points, can you hear me? All your points really resonated. Thank you, Kelvin. I'd like to put you on the spot and ask you, because your experience is so rich, what was the most awkward situation you found yourself in? Not necessarily from your fault, and how did you work around it?
Okay. Awkward from on the issuer side or the credit rating side?
The one you want to tell.
Okay, fine. Okay, so I have been to a bank. I used to rate also multilateral development banks in Togo and in Uganda. And I arrived for a meeting, a series of meetings. And when I arrived, the issuer was not ready at all. I found that really mind-boggling. I was there for a day and a half for some impromptu, well, not impromptu. We had told them that we were coming, but they were supposed to be relatively light meetings. They were not full mission meetings. And the issue was just not ready. And that created a very awkward situation. So I had to insist that they find someone at a reasonably high level for me to meet, because I couldn't explain to my bosses back in London at Moody's that I flew all the way out to Africa and didn't have any meetings at all. And this is absurd. So anyhow, we got things relatively sorted, but that didn't help their institutional and governance score for sure, because it just looked like it was totally shambolic. But we got some information out of it, and we managed to save the day, but that was probably one of my most memorable and not in a positive way encounters. So in summary, in Kenya, don't let that ever happen to you in any shape or form, not for a mission, for a meeting or anything. Always be prepared, because the impression that would be cast from that lack of preparation would not be good.